Imagine a time of great change in America. This time was called the Gilded Age. It happened a long time ago, from about 1870 to 1900. Gilded means covered in a thin layer of gold. On the outside, America looked shiny and new. Big cities grew. Tall buildings reached for the sky. New inventions like the telephone and the electric light changed everything. People had big dreams. They believed anyone could become rich and powerful. This was a time of great opportunity. It was a time when new industries were born. Steel and oil became very, very important. They were the building blocks of a new modern America. But if you scratched away the gold, you found problems underneath. While some people became incredibly wealthy, many others remained very poor. This is a story about power and inequality. Power is the ability to control things. Inequality means that things are not fair or equal for everyone. Some people have a lot, and others have very little. In the Gilded Age, a small number of men gained enormous power. They built huge companies that changed the world. They made more money than anyone had ever seen before. Their success was amazing, but their power also created deep divisions in the country. This essay will look at two of the most powerful men from that time. Their names were Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller. Andrew Carnegie was the king of the steel industry. His steel built railroads, bridges, and cities. John D. Rockefeller was the master of the oil industry. His oil lit up homes and powered new machines. These two men were brilliant. They were hard-working. They saw the future, and they built it. They are symbols of American success and the power of big business. They believed in a free market where companies can compete with few rules. But their stories are not simple tales of success. To build their giant companies, they sometimes used tough methods. They crushed their rivals. They paid their workers very low wages. People worked long hours in dangerous factories. The gap between the super-rich, like Carnegie and Rockefeller, and the poor workers grew wider and wider. This created a lot of anger and conflict. Their lives show us the two faces of the Gilded Age. It was an age of incredible progress, but it was also an age of deep social problems. We will explore how they built America and how they also built its inequality. Andrew Carnegie did not start life as a rich man. He was born in a small town in Scotland in 1835. His family was poor. They did not have much money. They did not have many opportunities. When he was a young boy, his family decided to move to America. They were looking for a better life. They sailed across the ocean. They settled in Pennsylvania. Like many immigrants, they had to work very hard just to survive. Young Andrew started working when he was only 13 years old. His first job was in a factory. He worked long hours for very little pay. He knew what it was like to be poor. But Andrew Carnegie was smart and he was very ambitious. He wanted more from life. He was always looking for a way to move up. He learned new skills. He took a job working for a telegraph company. He learned to send messages quickly and accurately. This job led to another opportunity. He started working for the Pennsylvania Railroad, one of the biggest companies in the country. He worked hard and impressed his boss, Tom Scott. Scott became his mentor. A mentor is someone who teaches and helps a younger person. Carnegie learned a lot about business and how to manage money from his time at the railroad. Carnegie was a clever investor. An investor is someone who uses money to make more money. He saved his small wages and bought shares in other companies. His investments did very well. By the time he was in his early 30s, he was already a wealthy man. He could have retired and lived a comfortable life. But Carnegie had bigger dreams. He saw that America was growing fast. It needed strong materials to build its future. It needed bridges to cross its wide rivers. It needed tracks for its thousands of miles of railroads. It needed frames for its new tall buildings, the skyscrapers. He decided to leave the railroad and start his own business. He traveled to England and saw a new way to make steel. It was called the Bessemer process. This process could make large amounts of strong steel much more cheaply than before. Carnegie knew this was the future. He came back to America with a single focus. He would build the biggest and best steel company in the world. He would provide the steel that would build the new America. He was no longer a poor boy from Scotland. He was on his way to becoming the man of steel, a true captain of industry. Andrew Carnegie was a genius at building his business. He did not just make steel. He wanted to control every single step of the process. This business method is called vertical integration. Imagine you want to bake a cake. With vertical integration, you would not just buy flour and sugar from a store. You would own the farm that grows the wheat. You would own the mill that grinds the wheat into flour. You would own the factory that makes the sugar. You would even own the trucks that deliver the cake to the customer. You control everything from the very beginning to the very end. This way you can make things more cheaply and efficiently. This is exactly what Carnegie did with steel. He bought the mines that had the iron ore. He bought the coal fields that provided the fuel to heat the furnaces. He owned the ships. He owned the railroads that transported these materials to his factories. His steel mills, like the huge Edgar Thomson Works near Pittsburgh, were the most modern in the world. He was always looking for new technology to make steel faster and cheaper. By controlling the whole process, he could sell his steel for a lower price than his competitors. Soon other steel companies could not compete with him. Carnegie's company, Carnegie Steel, grew at an incredible speed. It produced more steel than the entire country of Great Britain. His steel was used to build some of America's most famous structures. Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, the first skyscrapers in Chicago, thousands of miles of railroad tracks that connected the country from east to west. Carnegie became one of the richest men in the world. His success was a symbol of America's new industrial power. He was a master builder, not just of a company, but of a nation. In 1901, Carnegie decided to sell his company. He was 65 years old and wanted to focus on something else. He sold Carnegie Steel to a group of bankers led by J.P. Morgan for $480 million. This was an enormous amount of money at the time. It made Carnegie the richest man on earth, but he had a special view on wealth. He wrote an essay called The Gospel of Wealth. He believed that rich people had a duty to use their money to help society. This idea is called philanthropy. Philanthropy is when wealthy people give away their money to good causes. Carnegie spent the rest of his life giving his fortune away. John D. Rockefeller, like Andrew Carnegie, came from a simple background. He was born in New York in 1839. His family was not wealthy. His father was a traveling salesman who was often away from home. His mother was a very religious and disciplined woman. She taught him the importance of hard work and saving money from a very young age. Even as a child, John was a careful businessman. He would buy candy in bulk and sell the pieces to his friends to make a small profit. He kept a little book where he wrote down every penny he earned, every penny he spent. This careful attention to detail would help him later in life. When he was a young man, Rockefeller moved to Cleveland, Ohio. This was a growing city with many new opportunities. He got a job as a bookkeeper. A bookkeeper is someone who keeps track of a company's money. He was very good at his job. He was orderly, he was precise, he loved numbers. After a few years, he saved enough money to start his own small business with a partner. They sold grain, they sold hay, they sold meat. The business was successful, but Rockefeller was searching for something bigger. He saw a new industry that was just beginning to explode. That industry was oil. In 1859, oil was discovered in nearby Pennsylvania. At first, people used oil mostly to make kerosene. Kerosene was a cheap fuel for lamps. It replaced whale oil and allowed people to light their homes at night. It was a revolution. Small towns, big cities were suddenly brighter and safer after dark. Rockefeller saw that the real money was not in drilling for oil, which was risky. The real money was in refining it. Refining is the process of turning crude oil from the ground into useful products like kerosene. In 1863, he invested in his first oil refinery in Cleveland. Rockefeller was obsessed with efficiency. He wanted his refinery to be the best and most profitable. He hated waste. He famously said he wanted to know every drip of oil. He found ways to use every part of the crude oil. While other refiners threw away waste products like gasoline, Rockefeller found ways to sell them. He hired chemists to create hundreds of new products from oil, chewing gum, medical wax. His focus on cutting costs and eliminating waste allowed him to make his products cheaper than anyone else. This was the first step in his plan to dominate the entire oil industry. John D. Rockefeller's goal was simple. He wanted to control the entire oil industry. Imagine you own a bakery on a street with many other bakeries. With horizontal integration, your goal is to buy all the other bakeries. In the end, you own every bakery, and you are the only one selling bread. This is what Rockefeller did with oil refineries. His company was called Standard Oil. He started by buying up his competitors in Cleveland. He would offer to buy their companies. If they refused, he would often lower his prices so much that they could not compete and went out of business. By 1872, in just a few years, Standard Oil controlled almost all of the oil refineries in Cleveland. Then he moved on to other cities like Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and New York. He continued to buy or crush his rivals. His company grew larger and larger. Soon, Standard Oil refined about 90% of all the oil in the United States. This is called a monopoly. A monopoly is when one company has almost complete control over an entire industry. With no competition, a monopoly can set prices for its products. Rockefeller had achieved his goal of controlling the oil refining business, but Rockefeller did not stop there. He also used vertical integration, just like Carnegie. Standard Oil bought its own forests for wood to make barrels. It bought its own wagons. It bought its own ships. It built its own pipelines to move oil from the wells to the refineries more cheaply than railroads could. Rockefeller also made secret deals with the railroads. He would promise them huge amounts of business. In return, the railroads gave him special low prices, called rebates. His competitors had to pay much higher prices to transport their oil. This gave Standard Oil another massive and many said unfair advantage. To control his vast and growing empire, Rockefeller created a new kind of business structure. It was called a trust. A trust is when the owners of many different companies give control of their businesses to a small group of people called trustees. These trustees then manage all the companies as if they were one giant firm. The Standard Oil Trust, created in 1882, was the first and most famous trust in America. It allowed Rockefeller and his partners to control dozens of companies secretly. It was a powerful tool for building a monopoly and hiding the true size of his control over the oil industry. The success of men like Carnegie and Rockefeller had a huge impact on America. On one hand, they brought order and efficiency to chaotic industries. They lowered the price of steel and oil for everyone. Cheaper steel meant more railroads and bridges could be built. Cheaper kerosene meant more people could afford to light their homes. These industrial giants helped to build a modern, powerful nation. They created jobs for millions of people, many of them new immigrants arriving from Europe. The factories and refineries were symbols of progress and American strength. They showed the power of the free market to create wealth and innovation. However, there was a dark side to this success. The methods they used to build their empires were often ruthless. For small business owners, competing with Carnegie's steel company or Rockefeller's Standard Oil was nearly impossible. These giant companies could produce goods so cheaply that smaller firms were forced to sell out or go bankrupt. Many people felt that the free market was no longer free. It was a battlefield where only the biggest and most powerful could survive. The dream of starting a small business and succeeding was becoming harder to achieve. The industrial landscape was now dominated by a few giant monopolies and trusts. The lives of the workers in the factories and mills were also incredibly difficult. To keep costs low, companies paid very low wages. A typical worker might earn only a few dollars for a week of hard labor. They often worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. The conditions were also extremely dangerous. Steel mills were filled with fire, molten metal, and heavy machinery. Accidents were common, and many workers were injured or killed on the job. There was no insurance or help for families who lost a father or a son. Children as young as 8 or 9 years old also worked in these dangerous places to help their families survive. Because of the low pay and dangerous conditions, workers began to organize into groups called unions. Unions tried to fight for better wages, shorter hours, and safer workplaces. This led to many conflicts with the company owners. One of the most famous and violent strikes in American history was the Homestead Strike of 1892. It happened at one of Carnegie's steel mills in Pennsylvania. Carnegie and his partner Henry Clay Frick wanted to break the union. They locked the workers out and hired private guards. A bloody battle broke out between the guards and the workers. Many people were killed. The event showed the deep anger and division between the rich owners and the poor workers. The Gilded Age was a time of extreme wealth and extreme poverty living side by side. While workers struggled to feed their families, men like Carnegie and Rockefeller lived lives of unbelievable luxury. They built enormous mansions in New York City and vast country estates. Their homes looked like European palaces filled with expensive art and expensive furniture. They traveled on private railroad cars and yachts. They held parties that cost fortunes. This huge gap between the rich and the poor was a growing problem. People began to call these powerful industrialists robber barons. This name suggested they had stolen their wealth from the public and from their workers. These men did not just have economic power. They also had a great deal of political power. Their giant companies were so important to the economy that they could influence politicians and laws. They gave large amounts of money to political campaigns. They hired lobbyists to persuade lawmakers to pass laws that would help their businesses. Many people worried that the trusts and monopolies were becoming more powerful than the government itself. Political cartoons from the time often showed Standard Oil or the railroad trusts as giant monsters controlling the United States Senate. Democracy, some feared, was being sold to the highest bidder. Carnegie and Rockefeller had different ways of dealing with public criticism. Carnegie tried to improve his public image through his philanthropy. He built thousands of public libraries all across America and the world. He gave money to universities, science, and the cause of world peace. He wanted to be remembered not just as a businessman, but as someone who helped mankind. He argued that it was the duty of the rich to give back to society. He believed that this gospel of wealth was the best way to solve the problem of inequality. He gave away almost his entire fortune before he died. Rockefeller was a more private man. He was also a deeply religious Baptist. He gave away huge sums of money throughout his life, but he often did it quietly. He gave millions to his church, to universities, and to medical research. He created the Rockefeller Foundation, which worked to fight disease and hunger around the world. However, many people were suspicious of his charity. They saw it as a way to clean up his public image after years of ruthless business practices. The public remained divided. Were these men great captains of industry who built America, or were they robber barons who exploited it? By the 1880s, many Americans were becoming very angry about the power of the trusts. Farmers, small business owners. Workers felt that the system was rigged against them. They believed that monopolies like Standard Oil were destroying competition and hurting ordinary people. They demanded that the government do something to control the power of these giant corporations. A new political movement called the Progressive Movement began to grow. Progressives believed that the government needed to step in to solve the social and economic problems created by industrialization. They wanted to make society more fair and just for everyone. Newspaper reporters, writers also played an important role in this movement. They were called muckrakers because they raked up the muck or dirt on big business and politics. One of the most famous muckrakers was a woman named Ida Tarbell. Her father's small oil company had been crushed by Rockefeller's Standard Oil. She spent years researching the company. In 1904, she published a famous book called The History of the Standard Oil Company. It exposed the secret deals, the unfair practices, the ruthless methods Rockefeller had used to build his monopoly. Her book shocked the nation and increased public pressure for government action. In response to this growing public anger, the government finally began to act. In 1890, Congress passed a new law called the Sherman Antitrust Act. An act is a law made by a government. Anti means against, so this was a law against trusts. The law made it illegal for companies to form monopolies. or to do anything that would restrain trade or limit competition. At first, the law was not very strong. It was difficult to use against the powerful trusts. The big companies had the best lawyers and found ways to get around the law. But it was an important first step. It showed that the government was willing to challenge the power of big business. The real test of the Sherman Act came later. Presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, who was known as the trust buster, began to use the law more aggressively. The government took Standard Oil to court. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the country. In 1911, the court made a historic decision. It ruled that the Standard Oil Trust was an illegal monopoly and had violated the Sherman Act. The court ordered that the company be broken up into more than 30 smaller independent companies. It was a huge victory for the government and for the critics of big business. The age of the uncontrolled monopoly was coming to an end. The stories of Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller are the stories of America in the Gilded Age. They show the incredible power of ambition, innovation, the free market. These men were visionaries. They saw the future and built it with steel oil. They created massive industries, provided jobs for millions, made products that improved the lives of ordinary people. Their companies helped transform the United States into the world's leading industrial power. Through their amazing philanthropy, they also gave back hundreds of millions of dollars to improve science, education, health for generations to come. But their legacies are complex. Their stories are also about the immense inequality that their power created. To build their empires, they used methods that destroyed competition and concentrated enormous wealth and power in the hands of a very few. The workers who produced this wealth often lived in poverty and toiled in dangerous conditions. The rise of big business created deep divisions in American society, leading to anger, conflict, calls for change. The Gilded Age shines a light on the constant tension between creating wealth and ensuring that society is fair for everyone. It is a tension that still exists today. Their lives force us to look at two sides of the same coin. On one side, we see the captain of industry, a hero of capitalism who builds, creates, pushes society forward. On the other side, we see the robber baron, a villain who gets rich by exploiting others, bending the rules. Carnegie and Rockefeller were seen as both during their lifetimes, and they are still seen as both today. Their actions shaped the American economy and sparked a debate about the role of government and the responsibilities of the rich that continues to this day. As we look back at their lives, their power, and the inequality of their time, we are left with enduring questions. The world has changed a lot since the Gilded Age, but some of the challenges remain the same. The power of large corporations and the gap between the rich and the poor are still major topics of discussion all over the world. The legacies of Carnegie and Rockefeller remind us to keep asking important questions about our own society. When does the pursuit of wealth and power help society, and when does it harm it? What is the right balance between a free market and a fair society?